Hey everyone, it's Brittany here with our latest Stories of the Bible. Now, the last time we were together, we discussed Genesis chapters 20 and 21. I'm going to do a quick recap of where we are because today we are going to go through chapters 22 and 23. And some of what we've talked about in the past is very important for what is covered in chapter 22, and chapter 23 is important for what comes later in the story. So we are going to cover those today. Now, I am going to paraphrase almost everything today. Actually, I might paraphrase everything. I'm getting my stories from the NLT version, New Living Translation. So if you want to read these stories, please do. Even if you don't want to and you're curious about all the details that I might have left out, please read these stories. Don't take my word for it. I'm just hoping that I can give you a better understanding of the stories and the background that leads to these stories. So anyway, yeah, we're going to jump right in. As I said, a lot of the buildup is important to what happens in chapter 22. If you're looking at the NLT, it's titled Abraham's Obedience Tested. And if you look back at his story, he was promised a son. And as we have talked about in previous episodes, he tried to make that promise come true on his own by taking in his wife's slave woman as a new wife and had a child through her. However, that was not the child that God promised Abraham. God continued to bless Ishmael, the first son, and sent him off into the wilderness and promised him a family and a nation of his own. But this was not the promise that God had made for Abraham. He told him that he would have a son by his wife Sarah. And we see this enormous amount of time where this promise is seemingly withheld. It does not happen, it does not happen, it does not happen. And then finally, when Sarah is 90 years old and Abraham is 100 years old, they have this son whom they name Isaac. This was the answer to all of their prayers. This was the answer to the promise that God had made them. And so we see that he is growing, and there's some issues between Hagar, the slave woman, and Sarah. And at Sarah's demands, Abraham sends Hagar and their son Ishmael out into the wilderness. And so we have this family dynamic that is odd, but they are growing and changing. And then God comes to Abraham and tells him, you need to sacrifice your son. Yes, the son I promised you, Isaac, as a burnt offering. So this wasn't a quasi-sacrifice. This wasn't a spiritual sacrifice. This was literally God telling him, you need to kill your son and sacrifice him for me. And rather than arguing against him, Abraham says, whatever you say, God. And so he takes 2 servants and his donkey and his son, and they go out into the wilderness, and they come to a mountain. And as they are climbing it, Abraham turns to his 2 servants and says, stay here with the donkey. My son and I are going to continue on. And so Isaac is carrying the wood for the burnt sacrifice, and Abraham is killing the knife in the fire, and they walk up the rest of the mountain. And Isaac turns to his father and says, Father, where's the sacrifice? We have the wood, the fire, and the knife, but where is the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide. And so they make it up, and they build an altar, and Abraham lays the wood on top of the altar, and then he ties up his son and lays his son on top of the wood that is on the altar. And as he readies the knife to do this sacrifice, sacrificing his only son who is still living with him, an angel of the Lord comes and calls Abraham. And because Abraham was still listening, because he didn't allow his grief or his anger or his complete devastation to cover his relationship with God, Abraham hears. He stops and he says, "Yes, here I am." And the angel says, "Because you have shown your obedience to give up what you love more than anything in the world, you don't need to do it. You have proven your loyalty to God. Untie your son, and look, there's a ram caught in the briars. Sacrifice that instead." And so Abraham does. He releases his son. They sacrifice this ram. And this new chapter of faith in God is shown. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and sacrifice your children. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is, even when it seems like doing what God calls you to do seems like the exact opposite of what you should be doing, if it's biblical and if it's coming from God, then do it. Because God will make a way every single time. We just need to be listening constantly. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and it's because of that simple fact. I don't know about you, but so often, and I think I've said this before on one of my other videos, so often we hear something from God and we run gung-ho into it, thinking this is from God, so I just need to do it, and we stop listening. We cannot stop listening because step one might be the thing that seems like it's in the completely wrong direction, and step two might be God saying, "Look, you made that step. This is what you learned here. Now let's go this other direction." We have to be constantly listening. We have to be vigilant. If Abraham had stopped listening, he would have lost his son that day. Now, God could have provided the promise again, but because he was listening, his son lived. So keep that in mind the next time you feel like God is calling you to something. Now, I said we're going to go into chapter 23 too. And I told you that that's important for the story later on. And it is. So please buckle down. Stay with me. We're almost there. As we look at chapter 23, we find out that Sarah lived to be 127 years old. So she got to see 37 years of her son's life. And then she passes on, and they have to find a burial ground. Now, if you remember, Abraham is in a foreign land. He left his father's house, and yes, he is established. He has all of these people and these animals and all of this, but he's still in a foreign land. He doesn't have anywhere special where he can bury his loved ones, his family, and where he himself can be buried in the future. And so he goes to the people nearby and asks them if he can buy land from them to bury his dead. And they say, "Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want, we will make it work." And I'm probably going to butcher this name, so I apologize. But he goes to a certain person. He had a place in mind, and he goes to this person and he says, "I want the cave of Machpelah. I want to bury my dead there." And the Hittite replies and says, "Absolutely. It's yours. You can have the field, you can have the cave. Take it." And Abraham says, "No, we need to exchange this. I need to pay for it." And he said, the Hittite says, "What is it between friends? It's only 400 pieces of silver. That's nothing between us. Just take the field." And Abraham says, "No, I insist. I will pay for this field, and then it will be a permanent belonging to me, my family, and my descendants." And they do, in front of all of the people who are gathered. They make this agreement. Abraham pays the 400 pieces of silver, and that piece of land becomes their property. And when you look at this story later, we're going to come back to it. But this piece of land is part of the promised land, the exact land that God promises to Abraham that his family is going to own forever. And we do see previously we talked about the fact that the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, do indeed become enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. And when they come back, when they leave, when Moses leads them out of this land, out of this slavery, there is still this promised land, and that piece of ground that Abraham bought still belongs to them. And I think that's such a powerful statement that God will always set things up for the future. So again, if you walk away with nothing else from these stories, remember to always listen for God's voice. No matter what direction you think you should be going, keep your ears open and know that God is planning for your future every step of the way. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time for Stories of the Bible. God bless you guys. Thanks. Hey everyone, it is Brittany here, and I just wanted to say make sure you subscribe here on YouTube so you can see all of my new videos and watch all the old ones. I hope that these stories are helping you learn, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks!